Time for food chains. You've probably seen these before, but we are going to put some biology words to it that maybe you haven't seen before. The ultimate source where all energy comes from on Earth, at least for living things, is from the sun, photosynthesis. So, how do we get from the sun to you is a food chain. It's a series of steps where organisms are transferring energy by eating or by being eaten, or both, depending on where you're at in the food chain. If you're thinking of the version where there's a bunch of different arrows pointing in different directions, that's a food web, which is for tomorrow. We're just going to do food chain right now, one straight line. Here is an example of a food chain. I couldn't fit it straight, so I kind of wrapped it around here. It always starts with a plant. Something eats that plant, and then something eats it, and then eats it, and eats it. So energy is transferring from plant to animal to animal to animal to animal. The arrow is showing us the direction that energy is moving. Energy moves from grass to grasshopper, from grasshopper to frog, from frog to snake, from snake to hawk. Or you can think of it like who's going to end up in whose mouth. The grass is going to end up in the grasshopper's mouth. We can categorize living things by what they eat. If something is called a producer or an autotroph, that means it can make its own food, usually with sunlight, but there are some organisms that do it a different way. So they can do photosynthesis. Auto means self, troph means food, so it's self-feeder. They're plants. And some other organisms like algae, and there's some bacteria, but it's mostly plants and algae that do photosynthesis. Everybody else is called a consumer or a heterotroph, which means you must eat food. Hetero means other, troph means food, so it means other food. You have to eat somebody else to get their energy. So if you are a producer or an autotroph, you just are. You can do photosynthesis. That's your only category. But we can also take those consumers or heterotrophs and break them down into other groups based on what they eat. If an organism is a herbivore, herby is plants, vor is to eat. So eats plants. You can see there are invertebrates, vertebrates, insects, reptiles, fish, mammals. There's a bunch of different animals that eat plants. One way you can spot a herbivore is by looking at their teeth. They usually have very flat teeth, so they can kind of grind up all those plants. A carnivore, which means flesh eater. Carni is skin, flesh. Vor is to eat, flesh eater. They have to eat other animals. This is different. These two are different than being like a vegetarian. Herbivores don't get the choice. That's what their digestive system is set up to eat. Carnivores don't get the choice. Now, if a carnivore was starving to death, might it eat a plant? Maybe, but it wouldn't have a fun time digesting it. One way you can spot a carnivore is they have pointy teeth or pointy beaks. You think of like a wolf's teeth or a crocodile teeth, they're pointy. And then there are things like humans. We are omnivores. We can eat both. We have the ability to eat both. What you choose to eat is something different. I mean, if you don't want to eat vegetables, that's a choice, but you could. So you're an omnivore. Other omnivores would be all the other primates, raccoons, bears, ravens. That lizard is called a bearded dragon. They can eat both insects or plants. So we can eat both. And we tend to have both kinds of teeth, where they're both flat teeth and pointy teeth. These last two both eat dead things, but they do it in different ways. A detritivore, it's eating dead organisms and it physically has a mouth. Like this here is a dung beetle. That ball it's sitting on top of is elephant poop. Yes, it eats that. Or an earthworm has a mouth. It is physically eating it. You could consider like a vulture might be a detritivore. Anything that eats dead things but has a mouth would be a detritivore. Decomposers don't have a mouth. So like a mushroom is a decomposer, but it doesn't have a physical mouth. It's not eating something. So if you see mushrooms or molds that are growing on something, they're eating that thing, just without a mouth. They send out enzymes, break it down, and suck it back up. You could also throw bacteria and decomposers. So technically, these two eat the same thing. It just has a mouth versus doesn't have a mouth. There are some that can have multiple names to go with them. Like a vulture, we could consider a detritivore, or we could consider it a carnivore. It's not as cut and dry as you'd think. But these are categories we can organize consumers into. So when we put everybody in this list, from the plant all the way up, those are called trophic levels, which we're going to see more about with our whole class activity here and later. So it always starts with a plant. This one is on the left side is a on land version. This one is in this ocean version. But it always starts with a plant, something that can do photosynthesis. It's got to get the sun energy. They are called the producers. Then primary means first, so first consumers that eat the plant. And then there's second consumers, and third consumers, and fourth consumers. So energy is getting passed up this. Energy gets passed from the plant to the primary, to the secondary, to the tertiary. But, we need energy to do stuff. So only 10% of energy actually gets passed on to the next level. And what that means is you can only have so many levels because energy is going to run out. Here was my food chain from before. So let's say my grass here is getting 100% of all the energy coming in from the sun. It needs 90% of that energy to do grass stuff, whatever grass does. And then it only passes on 10% to the thing that eats it, the grasshopper. It's going to use 90% of that, so it only passes on 1% of the total energy. And then this guy's only going to pass on 0.1, and this one's only going to pass on 0.01. I'm going to do a visual of this in class because I know math is hard. But by the time you get to the top level, there's not very much energy left. That's why you'll see a whole bunch of producers, a lot of plants if you go outside, but you won't see very many hawks or snakes because there's not enough energy to sustain them. Let's do a quick review here of stuff you should know. You should know what a food chain is. We're going to build some food chains. You should know the difference between an autotroph and a heterotroph, and these different kinds of consumers are heterotrophs and what they eat, and what a trophic level is and how much energy gets passed on. Let's make the secret word detritivore. I feel like that's a fun word. We will see more about this in class and more with food webs. These are our last two topics for Bio A. So if you have questions, comments, concerns, let me know. See you with food webs.